Hello and welcome to another fun-filled edition of Adam's Music Box, where it was, in fact, on this day in 1974 that Bad Company's self-titled debut hit number one. Now, I absolutely love Bad Company, and I'm not alone because in the 70s they had huge global chart success and they really dominated US FM radio at the time. Of course, Paul Rogers and drummer Simon Cooke had a long history before that of being in the band Free, which, although it had quite a lot of widespread success, with the exception of the song All Right Now, it was definitely more successful as a band in the UK and parts of Western Europe than in the US, even though they had so many good songs: Wishing Well, Heartbreaker, the list goes on, Mr. Big. Be My Friend. We could go on for ages. And some people at the time thought that Bad Company was a kind of lesser version of Free, but those people are what we would call snobs because both bands were great on their own. And of course, there were similarities because Simon Cooke's very sort of rock steady, it's almost going to drag, but it stays in the pocket. Cool style of drumming. That was, of course, a similarity. And Paul Rogers, arguably one of the very top vocalists in all of music history. He was obviously the lead singer in both. Boz Burrell was over there on the bass, and they really just had a sound that was defining of an era. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, in some ways, the 70s is kind of a difficult era to define because there were so many different styles of music that all contended for the top of the charts. And because of that, there is no one 70s sound, but there are many 70s sounds. And Bad Company were one of those sounds. They were a kind of rock music that was stripped of the pretense, but which had the great musicianship, which had the production that was very natural sounding, easy on the ear. As we get further and further towards the 20th century, a lot of production becomes almost too in love with itself. And let's not consider the listening experience of the audience. Let's instead see what new tricks can we use. None of that with Bad Company. Bad Company was a band that really had a live sound on record. And thanks to the fact that a few years back they released some concerts they did in 77 and 78, we can really hear that they were the same band live as they were in the studio. And I don't think they ever released a weak album. Some fans would say that their first couple of albums were the best, but when you really think about it, I mean, if I had to say, I would say Burning Sky is probably my favorite of all the Bad Company albums, just because it has such a diverse number of songs that are all so played so well, from the funky to the psychedelic to the bluesy to the hard to the folky. But you could say that there's a lot of diversity on all of their albums. And even when you go to Rough Diamonds, the final album of the classic lineup, there are still some absolute bangers on there. I defy anyone to go and put on Rough Diamonds and, in particular, listen to the first two tracks, Electric Land and Untie the Knot, and not say that those are absolutely classic Bad Company songs. The band continued to have success into the later 80s with a different production style and different lead singers that came in. Brian Howe probably being the most well-known one and a great singer in his own right. But it's hard to switch singers when you had an icon like Paul Rogers. Now, some bands are able to switch singers and have an equal amount of success. Genesis, Van Halen, there are others that I'm sure will come to mind, AC/DC, and the list can go on. Bad Company had relative success in the post Paul Rogers era, but that quintessential Bad Company sound was the 70s era. And I think that it kind of helps when you are going to switch singers before musical styles change. So when AC/DC changed from Bon Scott to Brian Johnson, the style of music around AC/DC hadn't changed dramatically. They didn't really take a break. Same with Van Halen. There wasn't too much space between Roth and Hagar, and the kind of music Van Halen was playing didn't really need too much of an updating. But between 1982, when Rough Diamonds was released, and 1986, when Fame and Fortune was released, the production style of music had changed, and Rough Diamonds was frankly a 70s sounding album made in the early 80s. But by the post Paul Rogers era, they really had embraced that 80s production style that we've talked about so much on this channel before. It's all really good music, but for me, it's really the Paul Rogers, Simon Cooke, Boz Burrell, and Mick Rafe's lineup that was just so it's the kind of rock music that if you were to meet someone from outer space and they say, what's the most sort of classic of the classic rock music? And you didn't want to go too hard or too soft. You didn't want to go too esoteric, but you also didn't want to go too poppy. I would say that you would give that alien creature a copy of any of the classic Bad Company albums, and he'd say, ah, so this is what the kids were getting down to in the mid 70s. And you'd have to say, yes, they were. And for good reason. Great songwriting, great playing, great production, amazing vocals. They had it all. So congratulations to something that happened in 1974, but which may be happening today on the Spotify's around the world. Like, subscribe, and we will see you next time. Take care.